like I want it to look as if I painted it from life. You can't do that because it's not in front of you. So kind of what I do now is you're letting yourself noodle it out, figuring it all out. And then once you've extricated that knowledge from the ether, then you can go and paint alla prima and just, set it down like you know what you're doing.
Hey, thanks for listening. Last night was this semi-annual writer gathering where everybody brings something, kind of chocolate and a book, and then we exchange favorite reads from the year. Kind of a Secret Santa Yankee swap thing. But 90% of the time is spent talking about, writing and the struggles of writing, et cetera, and so forth. And like one thing popped out at me, the phrase, what if? And like how powerful, inspirational, and damaging what if is to creatives, where we think, oh, okay, well, we understand how things take a certain amount of time, effort, and energy, or whatever the thing is, or the odds are so against us in these chances. But what if? You take luck and talent out of the equation and you wonder, what is the ejection point when you go, all right, what if is no longer fueling this towards a beneficial solution, but more so problematic one? Yeah, it was just one of those moments where we were talking, we started laughing about how it can just pull us into the worst things. And then I also talked about this project I did years ago, kind of a period when I was avoiding the idea of writing by doing other things. I think one thing that was holding me back was flat file and folders full of ideas of things that I've started that I had never finished or never went anywhere, and how existentially painful that can be. And I started what I call, this is back in the blogging days, I started a blog called the Loose Ends Project, where I went through and finished them. And if I didn't think they had any chance of getting finished, I got rid of them. Getting them done was a huge emotional check. And I can recommend it as a great exercise to look at these things and not be so painfully self-critical because we didn't finish something. Because, man, every creative has stacks of these things. It's just the nature of the beast. But rather than it being a burden, I think we can turn them into something a little more positive and uplifting. And I'd love to hear if anybody has their own experience with something like this and what they do. Let me know. So today's guest is Paolo Rivera. Palo is, a consummate artist, an artist, a phenomenal painter, amazing draftsman, and, a super busy guy doing, people come on the show sometimes to talk about projects that they're promoting. Paolo's not coming on to promote anything. He's promoting a bunch of non-disclosure agreements, so he can't talk about much of anything, but he super generous in our conversation about his thinking and about his career and what he does. He dropped these, these bombs. And like one of them, I just love his idea of art sit-ups, getting those reps in on whatever the thing it is you're doing, and you're just doing it over and over and over. And, that's like what drawing a monthly comic book is. It's getting your sit-ups in. Like, you are just going to be ripped and cut and ready for whatever, because you do it every day and you really have to figure it out to be successful at it. So I had a great time talking with him. He is really just quite amazing in his professionalism. It's unbelievable. And he has maybe one of the most unique stories in the comic business, where he works with his father, and not in the terms that he is the legacy of his father in the comic industry. He brought his father in, which is so cool. I don't know. I love the idea of being able to work with a parent, and like in a really great way. So this is me with Paolo Rivera. What is it, like the 1 month holiday crunch.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, it's the same thing every year. I try not to put too many things in my schedule, and then it all ends up getting backed up.
I explain it to people, I'm like, all I do is I play Rush, Rush up before Thanksgiving, and then it's just all this playing catch up all the way through until
Yeah,
January.
exactly, exactly. I try not to do it every year, but it always happens.
So where are you in this great nation?
Uh, just south of San Francisco, a town called Belmont.
Oh, okay, cool,
Yeah,
awesome,
about 30 minutes south.
nice. Have you been there your whole life?
Oh, no, no, no. I'm originally from Florida. We moved out here, my wife and I, in 2013.
Okay.
She works for Google. So she worked for Google in New York for a year, and then we both moved out here together when she got put on full time or converted from, I can't remember how long. It was 10 years ago.
Till she was assimilated fully.
Basically, yeah. And she's been there ever since. So, I've been a freelancer forever. So it's pretty easy for me to just pick things up and go.
When you say New York, were you talking New York City? Was she there at the 15th Street building, like that big one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
cool.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Matt.
it's a whole city block.
I know. No, I know. I lived in New York for 25 years, and you see these buildings that were sort of like nondescript forever because
Yeah,
like who's going to do anything with this gigantic building? And then
yeah,
this shift happened, and then Google came in and picked up one of the biggest around, and bam, there's this whole ecosystem that they put in place in like no time.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy, and they do that, in every big city across the whole
Sure.
world. I've been to the Zurich office. I think I went to the London office. Yeah, they're always incredible.
I spent some time. So I went to a writers conference earlier this year, and I was sitting in the lobby the night before it started, and this guy sat down, and he was, he had his luggage. He was clearly going somewhere, but he wanted to talk. He didn't want to leave me alone to do my work. So so we had this conversation. But he was one of the original. I don't know what the number was, but like original 10 employees for Google.
Oh boy.
Uh, I know he.
Did you ask him to buy you lunch?
I wish it. Yeah, he was working, I think, for IBM at the time, and whoever were the people who put the money into the two guys starting Google, they said you have to hire this guy because he's the one who can make what you're trying to do happen.
Hmm.
So like he was like the experience that they needed because he was older. So like
Yeah.
there's always this thing of like put an older person in there, because of the experience factor, and
Oh yeah.
that was his role. And you would never guess it looking at him. He just looked like schlubby guy, but really, really nice, and
Yeah.
eccentric in his own way for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's the whole Bay Area. I'm just kind of tangential to it all, but I see it all happen nearby. So it's been interesting to watch everything that's gone down in the last 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, getting sort of a second row seat has kind of been pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's interesting times because it's now I think I mean Google's part of it, but they're kind of having to pivot because the new kid in town is all the AI stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they're a part of it, but they're not in the they're I don't understand the whole structure thing. I know they own a certain aspect of it, but anything that I've seen that they've done, it doesn't quite seem to be as advanced as what I see coming out of other places.
Mm-hmm.
I I don't know what I'm talking
No,
about,
I know
but I see the results.
yeah, they're so big. I mean, the thing is, they are so big and broad,
Yeah.
and rather, unlike an Amazon, which is a service-based company that has spread itself into all these different sort of arenas,
Hmm.
or an Apple, which is a hardware-based company, which has spread itself into more entertainment than anything else. it is interesting to see how the informational section that is Google and what they've done to try to expand their sort of their reach in a
Mm.
global fashion. It's fascinating stuff to me. I as a writer, I go, what can happen with this? That's the whole what if scenario,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
and it's
Yeah,
never
I
good. You don't want it to be good because it's not a fun story if it's good.
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is I use all these things, so I want it to all be fairly successful. But
Mm-hmm.
I, every conversation I have now on the playground with other parents, it's like it's all about this stuff. Because we just everybody, all the parents I talk to, they all work in tech,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I'm always the odd man out. So they
Right.
always, they always want to ask my opinion on, Mid Journey, that that kind of AI.
Right.
And fortunately, the NFT thing has kind of died down. But I was getting a lot of that for a couple of years there. I never expected. Well, I always knew it was going to go bust, but
Mm-hmm.
it was just kind of a question of when. But I never got involved with it.
I always felt like it was funny because for years I kept going to myself like, so, and whenever, and I bought a Cintiq, 13, 14 years ago, and I
Mm,
loved it. It's a
yeah.
great tool for a, manual artist. It sort of gives you this connection to the digital realm, which is unparalleled. But I kept going like, wow, like there's people who just strictly live in the digital environment.
Hmm.
And how would you give a commission to someone? Like to me, they always felt this weird connection because I feel like they were being held apart from things. And I said, if there was only a way to create a unique, code of some sort, which
Yeah.
could only
Yeah.
be for this one file, you could give a commission to someone and that would be the thing. And lo and behold, they create blockchain, which is that, but it
Hmm.
did not get utilized for what I would call a benevolent purpose. It got utilized for a very different role.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the idea. I wasn't, some people were very, very adamant against it. I didn't really care. Uh, some people made a lot of money on it, like whatever.
Mm,
The one point that, one of the dads I was talking to, I think he now works for Microsoft, but anyway, his point was that the reason it hit so big was because all of these blockchain guys, the people who are already invested in it, there was just a lot of pent up money that was
mm,
already sunk into that. And so it looked like it exploded. And it did. It was a ton of money. It all flowed into that. But once that money got in there, that's kind of like that was the limit.
yeah.
Your typical art buyer is not going to come off of comicartfans.com and start spending their money, their hard-earned
Right.
US dollars, and putting it into this digital currency. So again, there's a lot of money, but once that initial dam burst, it kind of has flatlined. And
Yeah.
what the part I never liked about it was just that everybody who was super into it, even if I liked their art, and there is a lot of artwork that I do like. I just saw a couple things today that were great, and I still follow some of those guys. Uh, they were just having to work too hard. It just sounded like part of their job was just being a salesperson.
Mm,
And so, you know, as with most art, it's like I either like it or I don't. And I don't want to have them constantly pitching, on the benefits of this new form when all I really care about is the one art. That being said, I'm a terrible patron of the arts. Most of those people that I follow on Twitter, I don't give them any money whatsoever. I try
right.
to, repost their artwork when I can, but art's just one of those things, and you don't actually need it to survive. I like surviving with it, but
Hmm.
there has to be some kind of mechanism for providing those artists with something they can live on to buy the
Yeah.
things that they actually do need.
Right. Right. Yeah. And my wife is a contemporary fine artist. And so the
Oh wow, so
conversation, Oh yeah, I firsthand. Like I'm your wife who works for Google. That's who I am in the relationship.
I see. I see.
So it is
That's always my first piece of advice to young budding artists. I was like, find
mhm.
somebody with a real job.
Right, totally. Totally. And I don't even think I have a real job, but it's just like I happen to have enough experience in enough realms that I can do a lot of different work. So
Yeah, yeah.
um it's tough. And then, I think all these things are just, I mean, who knows if, the first wheel invented was used for the intention of what the wheel has become.
Mhm.
Someone just could have like created like, hey, this is the new thing to chase down a small animal that we can, then eat. They
Yeah.
roll it down a hill and it runs over a small animal and they're like, hey, we eat this. And then someone invents an axle and changes the whole dynamic. So all this stuff could just be a bunch of unusable wheels until someone creates the axle. Like we don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, the reason I don't go, I've seen so many people fight it. I don't I don't think we can. The reason that I'm not totally worried about the AI thing right now is just because of what the Copyright Office has done.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I fully support the class action lawsuit that has just been filed by several colleagues of mine against OpenAI, just because I think they need to pay somehow. Uh,
Sure.
the most egregious example being, if your name as an artist illustrator is being used as a prompt, then you
Straight
should
up.
get something. I mean,
Totally.
now how that actually happens, I don't know, and it's going to be a fight. And I think this is the beginning of that fight to see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, this stuff to me is all fascinating. And I feel kind of fortunate that we're in a time that we can see this happening firsthand and
Yeah.
experience it regardless, who knows? I mean, hopefully, the outcomes are going to be safe and nobody's blown up in the process, but, um, I love it. I mean, me, being I guess a recovered cave painter such as yourself. I I I love seeing this because I love having gone from a completely analog existence in my
Yeah.
life as a creator to what I consider a very hybrid based environment of how do I work, how do I get my jobs done,
Mhm.
and the tools make things much faster. Like you just have to figure it out. Like Photoshop is faster than going into the dark room. I'm not going to
Yeah.
argue that. Like, and
Yeah.
every tool that we have, the AI stuff, as you said, like, I mean, and they'll have to figure it out. I mean, and they should figure it out because it could be a great tool for somebody down the road. And we just
Mhm.
got to figure out how we use these things.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I've already seen that I personally would like to use. I haven't used it yet, but I have any like fundamental rule about not using it. What
Mm-hmm.
is funny is I've signed several contracts in 2023 that forbid me from using any generative AI in the creation of my artwork. They don't want it anywhere in the
Wow.
pipeline. And that's
Yeah.
specifically because of what the Copyright Office said. Like, you can't copyright that mechanically generated artwork. And if that's the case, then none of these IP companies that hire me are going to want it. Now, that doesn't mean they won't change that eventually, but I'm sure, some accountant somewhere is trying to figure out, accountant and lawyer is trying to figure out how they can use it because, what is so expensive about making an animated movie? It's the labor cost.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen. And the thing is, like, I would love to make, you know, more of like I'm bounded by these hands. Like I can't
Sure. You're not
produce.
scalable.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I would love to be able to use some of those tools, but I can't. Uh, if I can't copyright it, then there's no chance that I'm going to do it. You know.
Right. Well,
So
and listen, robots, if you're listening, um, I would love to have an AI service that I could have my own partition and I could
yeah,
upload all my own artwork
yeah.
into it and
Well,
then
they've already got that.
and become more scalable in that process so I can just build off of my own world
Right,
and go
right.
that way, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No,
Thank you, robots.
that's already out there. That's already out there. They've got it. There was one I was gonna try. I just saw it today. No, last night. that I want to give it a shot. It was some kind of enhancer.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if here's the thing, is like you don't ever know if it works quite the way. And I just at this point I just want to see if it does what it says it does. And basically that was taking a sketch or a rough animatic or just any kind of rough idea, and then you know the joke, I don't know what movie it's from, where they just keep saying enhance, enhance, enhance,
Right. Right.
and it's just like the information's not there. But in this case, it is. But where is the information coming from? It's because it's scraped the entire internet for all that
Sure.
pictures and
Yeah.
stuff. So
Well,
I just want to
scrape
see if it works.
you. Have it just scrape you, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I know. Listen,
Well,
I mean,
that's the other thing. It's like I don't own any of the artwork that I've done. Like
right,
Marvel slash Disney owns a good, the large, I'd say 70% of everything I've ever
right.
made. So that's going to be tricky no matter what. Um, so yeah, interesting times ahead. What I'm not worried about
Yeah.
is, 50% of my income is from original art sales, and that's
Mm-hmm.
been the case for not 20 years, but almost my whole career. And so that this skill is
Mm-hmm.
only going to become scarcer as time goes on, because there's going to be less people learning how to do it. So I'm not worried about it as long as my hands and my eyes keep working. I can keep doing that. Uh, but yeah, everything else, I have no idea how it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think the further you place yourself from it, the more in peril you become to it in that sense. So like,
Mhm.
it doesn't behoove us to hide from this stuff as creators. I think creators need to be
Yeah.
apprised of this stuff, to be, the people who didn't want to learn how to use, going back to Photoshop so long ago, you're so behind the curve when the time comes when you realize I can only get this job done if I use this whatever software out
Yeah.
there. So, we, because the world doesn't move at the speed of our hands anymore. That's the inherent, problem. I had,
Yeah.
in 1998, 99, I was surprise late on a project for a publisher. And, it was like FedEx wasn't even a solution at that point. Like,
Right.
so I went to, I had the thing scanned, and I sent it to a Kinko's that was down the street from the publisher in LA, so they could go down there and get a disc and go back to their office with the artwork, because
Yeah.
they didn't have a way to take the art. They didn't have a way to receive the digital artwork. They were like, we
Mhm.
won't, so like having the disc was the solution. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it was complex and cumbersome to say the least, but ye old zip drive solved the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I like being the age that I am, because I was there for the transition, but still early enough to be able to like keep up with all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because like my parents, they both have computers, but sometimes they do things on it. I'm just like, and I don't know how a computer works, but I know how to use a computer. Uh, so my dad inks me uh, fairly often, and when he started inking me on Daredevil, I didn't have to teach him how to ink. I had to teach him how to scan.
Hmm.
So like he was able to do that kind of basic stuff, but like I had to be there physically. Like I flew to Florida, which they're still in Daytona Beach, and just showed him like where it goes, roughly how the file system works, how to do folders and all that kind of stuff. He's decent at all that stuff now. He's pretty much on autopilot. But uh, as far as computer stuff that goes, like they're not going to learn any new stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, my role for at least 2 decades was reprogramming the VCR,
Yeah. I mean
the
that's
clock
typical.
on there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the role in the family.
yeah.
Um, is that so? I mean, you have some pretty cool digital products on your website for sale, and one of them being, I guess one of them being the bitmapper.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah. I
I
mean, like
need.
that to me, like I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm thinking you probably made that for your dad. You're like, just run this.
Yeah, yeah. It was a Photoshop. Everything that's up there. It's just stuff that I use. The one I haven't done is like I have a whole perspective system that I use for, anytime I have to draw a background, and I want to sell it. The only thing that's keeping me from doing is like the instructions. And so
Right.
I made a concerted effort at the beginning of January of this year to try and formalize it. And, I spent a couple of weeks on it, and I was like, I got to move on. I got to do other stuff. I might try again this January because, I have it. It's done. It works. It's just getting people to understand how to use it. But, and then the second thing is like Clip Studio already does it.
Mm-hmm.
Procreate on iPad already does it. So it's like all these things. But I do think there's still something valuable there because as a working illustrator, specifically a comic book artist, or at least I used to be, I haven't drawn one in a while. There are certain things about mapping out perspective that you only use if you have to create a story and
Mm-hmm.
you are bounded by certain rules that were set forth by the panel beforehand. And so it's not just setting up vanishing points. Like that's easy. Anybody can do that. What's difficult is mapping things out and dividing space into equal grids and basing those grids on other things. Uh, I need to do it. I haven't done. People have asked me for it for years. It's I don't know if I'll ever get around to producing it.
I wonder if it would work if you did it as a video tutorial of you teaching somebody how to use it.
I have like I've already made a couple tutorials of it, but the thing I don't want is to put it out there and then spend half my time answering questions about it because I
Answering
just don't.
not
Yeah, because I already
Yeah.
I already do some of that, and actually I enjoy it because I love talking shop and whatnot. But uh, you know, not scalable. Again,
Right.
comes
Right. I
down to
mean,
that.
it always comes back down to that, which is that is like the ultimate like weapon against the artist in so many ways is this
Yeah,
lack of scalability.
yeah, but it's also what makes us special. So it's
Yeah.
like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
it's one of those
Snowflakes.
it's one of those weird things. Is like we're part of this industrial machine, especially when it comes to comics, uh, where we want to feel special. We're creating a look that belongs to us, uh, but at no point can we forget that we're a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's especially with comics and that kind of IP, there's always going to be that tension. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
was
don't know.
so concerned when I went off to art school about being able to be, to make money. Like it was this
Mm.
big concern. I went to SVA and I'm like, oh man, it came from the family. They're like, so how are you going to do this? How are you going to make comic books, a
Yeah,
livelihood? And it was this
it's a good
big
question.
concern. Yeah. And, my only answer at the time was like, well, I knew that they had to produce them. Like they're on the shelves every
Yeah.
month. So they're there.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
all I need to do is get a slot and I'll be in space and I'm okay, fine. So I was like hunting down, time with editors when I was still in school because I'm like, I need to be productive. And
Yeah.
I never even considered anything outside of that in the terms of like, I'm not like, sure, I have ideas. Sure, I want to write something. But like the idea is, and early 90s was not exactly made it easy to make your own comic book back then. But I could only think of like, I just got to get a book, get another new thing with the new editor or whatever the thing was. And it took so long for me to realize like, oh, like the long-term investment is doing my own thing, not so much
Hmm.
as doing their thing, which sucked,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always a trade-off.
Yeah.
That's how it is. Yeah.
What was your focus? You went to the, the cooler version of my school. You went to RISD.
Well, SVA, that's where Mazzucchelli also taught. He taught at RISD, and
Yes.
in fact, I
Yeah.
don't even know if he's still at SVA. But yeah, I went to RISD, majored in illustration, graduated in '03, and it was great for me. The best part was probably junior year. I spent a year in Rome,
Mm.
And you know, I think a couple of years they finally, I don't think they canceled the program outright, but it's not going to continue to exist in the same format as when I enjoyed it, because it was a program that started back in the 60s. Like, I think the first group of kids went over in a boat. And I'm like I know airplanes existed back then,
Right, right.
but I guess it was a cheap way to get over there.
Well,
Uh,
I'm sure there was some sort of rule that you have to ship artists in the boat.
I yeah, I don't know. They're like sketching each other on a long ass voyage there. Yeah, but yeah, that was a great experience. Didn't learn enough Italian, but it's really where I think I gained. When you go to art school, like one teacher described it to me as doing art sit-ups, and it's true. Like you have to go through that. But junior year is when I really kind of decided like comics was the thing. And also I had
Hmm.
a really good group of friends who were also very into comics. And I don't know, we just started doing it, you know,
Yeah.
you just, because we didn't have classes. So like I didn't have to, I don't want to say waste my time, but in my mind it would have been. I didn't want to waste my time doing editorial. Now, what's funny is like one of my friends, Archie Crow Johnson, he, always wanted to do comics. Now he's an editorial illustrator. He still makes his own comics, but he makes the comics for himself.
Right.
Although that being said, he did just, I'm doing some Bizarro covers for Action Comics, variant covers. He did one too, which is lovely. It's so great. Um, but anyway, the funny thing is he's now an editorial illustrator. And he's great at it, but that's I guess you would call it his day job. Uh, but then when he makes comics, it's just for himself,
Hmm.
unless it's a piece for. He did just do a piece for the New Yorker, like a long form, I think a 4-page. I still need to read it, but it was about the Lahaina fires in Maui. Uh, Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, well, you were talking the idea of like committing to doing comic books while you're off in Rome.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a year. We just kind of all, uh, we just didn't have classes. We just didn't have classes, so we were just free to do whatever we want, and so we did. It was great.
Wow.
And so when
Yeah,
we
because I
got back senior year, like that's what we wanted to do, and we didn't want to really hear anything else from anyone.
were you seeing? I mean, were you chasing down like what was happening in Europe through their comic books as well, like to get some influence, or were you still
You know,
just
I
mentally like American?
I loved all that stuff, uh, and it was funny. Like with my name, like when I first got into comics, everyone thought I was from Europe.
Right.
Like I was like painting these things, or Brazil. Yeah, I've heard it all. Now I think most people know I'm American, but yeah, we would go to comic shops there, and it was always amazing. It just seemed more, I guess, respected from like, I don't know, a general culture sort of way.
Hmm.
Obviously it's here, it's pervasive now because of the movies and cartoons and all that kind of stuff. But over there was just a level of respect for just the art that didn't ever seem to exist here. And I experienced that firsthand, like when I went to a convention in Mexico City, and I I'd had more people asking me to sign books than I'd ever had in any convention in the States in my entire career. So it's something about America where it's just not as big as it is other
Hmm.
places. But the European art, I tend towards, I don't know, I like it all.
Yeah.
It did influence me, but I don't think it's as direct as say someone like John Buscema.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I see the Ramita Senior and the Buscema stuff like in your work, like it's just so like alive, in your faces and your figure work. Like there's that whole thing. Although I'm sure being in Rome and exposed to the classical figures out there, I'm sure that probably only improved your dynamism in that sense.
Yeah, I always tell students, like, if you're gonna draw some sculptures. Like, you
Yeah.
can't, like, they're there, they'll sit still for you, and it's already been, processed through an utter master of craft. And so, it's just all upside for you. You
Yeah.
because when you well, it's just from everybody's going to grow up copying, but what always happens with comics is just gets inbred. You're just copying other comic book artists, and then you have to at some point diverge from your influences. And if you just go, way back when, the people who lived thousands of years ago or 500, uh, you just you can't beat that level of quality, and no one will be able to say, "Oh, he is a Leonardo clone." Like, nobody cares. Uh, but yeah, comics just always kind of has that problem.
That was sort of the when I first met John Paul when he went to school with me,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and and man, like looking at he was 18 years old and looking at his sketchbook, it was like looking at Michelangelo. I'm like,
yeah,
how are you drawing like this, like at such a young
yeah,
age?
yeah,
But and nobody was saying like, what a Michelangelo hack that kid is. Like
yeah,
nobody,
exactly.
no one's saying that.
Oh man, yeah, he was a titan. Like I just I got to meet him once down in Savannah for
Mm-hmm.
their comic get together they used to have. I don't know, maybe they still have it. But yeah, he was amazing. I first got introduced to his artwork through Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and that brought me into comics in a way. I was about 18, maybe 17 when those started coming out, and that's really when I started actually reading comics. Um, I always had some lying around. I was always drawing those figures, but most of the stories I was getting from the cartoons and and movies. Batman '89, '92. But that comic in particular, uh, it just kind of brought me into the fold and introduced me to just Marvel history in general.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then furthermore, it had a bigger influence on my life because Jim Kruger wrote it, and I ended up meeting Jim at a convention, and he's the one that not just introduced me to Marvel, but hired me to
Mm-hmm.
do some of the work, for some of his creator-owned projects. And then after I'd done that, then he introduced me to Marvel, and I used the stuff I'd done for him as my portfolio. So,
Mm.
it kind of all goes back to Earth X. I still remember uh, very fondly. Uh, I'm so glad I got to meet.
Yeah, Jim was in the 90s, man. He was like kind of this template for like what you could do. Like
Mhm.
because he was doing so much outside of
Yeah,
the mainstream, like Foot Soldiers with Oming and other projects. It was just like because you get so fixated on this sort of big two world that you don't even really recognize like there's so much opportunity for for this creativity that can be done outside of the existing IP.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He was always doing all kinds of stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
it was great to see that at a young age, and be able to actually work on those properties as well. Um, yeah, we did. I I didn't make, like, it was mostly one-off illustrations. The only exception being something called Children of the Left Hand, and that was actual comic work, but it was only 6 pages. It was kind of like a teaser
Mm-hmm.
for something larger, but then we were never able to make it happen. Turn it into a full book. I still think it would make for a great project. We've talked about it later on, but it would be a pretty big commitment on my part.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is just the ongoing conversation, of
Yeah, yeah,
the labor involved in just making these damn books that we if we didn't love them, we wouldn't do them. So we
right, right, right.
it's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, slash curse of the artist.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, fine, I'll put in the hours. I need to get this done, and I get it. I mean, we've all done it.
Yeah.
Um, what was your so I mean what was your experience in doing those, like that first teaser thing to getting your first hire from like a big two publisher saying, like, did you have a different frame, like mentality, like, oh boy, it's on now? Like, was there a sense of like heat?
Uh, I mean, I had always wanted to work for Marvel, so
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the reason I talked to Jim because when I met him, I was 18 at a comic convention. I met him and Alex Ross, and Jim actually I can't remember exactly how I contacted. It may have been I contacted him through Wizard magazine or something. Like they had
Nice.
yeah, they had a contest. That's what it was. And he actually wrote me back, kind of rebuild all this in my mind. Um, it's a straight line from his creator-owned project to Marvel because he brought me into the offices,
Mm-hmm.
like physically brought me into the office back when you could do this. Now there's
Yeah.
layers and layers of security. Uh, I showed it to I think two, maybe three editors while we were there. They all said, good work. Sorry, we don't have any work for you. But I got Joe Quesada's emailed him that night with digital examples of the work. He got back to me the next day and said, basically, you're hired.
Nice.
So, if I hadn't had that portfolio from Jim, I don't know how long it would have taken.
Right.
And then, once that happened, then I started working for Marvel, and I was still in school. I still have my senior year to go. So I didn't go full steam until a year later after graduation. And that's
Okay.
when I really started working for them, like, all the time.
And I mean, listen, I can't emphasize this enough. We live in a very high digital access to people in this world, but we live in a low physical access
Yeah.
frame of life. And I cannot recommend enough to anybody who wants to do a thing,
Hmm.
whether it's comic books or whatever, get that Wizard magazine hookup, i.e.
Yeah.
online, and then make the effort to make that physical contact with those people, because that's the way that you're going to get the real hand help,
Hmm.
talk,
Yeah.
coaching, reality check, whatever the thing is. It's going to come from that route.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of why I didn't have to move to New York City, but it's where my friends were and it's where Marvel was. I was already working for Marvel,
Mm-hmm.
but I loved being there. Like it was just nice to go into the office, go to the holiday parties. Like all the people I
Dude,
met, it's still
yeah.
people I'm friends with. Uh, I, you know, Again, it's not absolutely necessary, but if you're just starting out, like it sure as hell doesn't hurt. It really
No,
doesn't.
no. And I think, with a very different model than it is now than it was for you or for me,
Yeah,
you
it's
know, we,
totally changed
we,
now.
we don't have that, there isn't that accessibility on on the office side, but there certainly is at conventions. And I think people can make that. Look, listen, find the podcast that the people are on, find the
Yeah.
articles that they're in, reach out to them with specific, like, hey, I really dug what you said about this. It really, connected with me. Don't use my words, because then you'll know you're phony. But that's the way. That's the way to really try to make these connections. Because if you don't make those connections, you're just another email in the inbox, which,
Yeah.
who knows? And I don't know when the bloom of having X amount of thousands of followers on Instagram is going to wear off, because doing a drawing on Instagram isn't actually making comics. Like, these are the kinds of things, or the whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And the social media thing, like it's just so unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who the hell knows what's happening with Twitter?
Right.
I
No.
signed in today, on my phone, and like the UI, not the UI, posts weren't displaying. Like everything was collapsed, and
Mm.
like you couldn't even click into it. So who knows what's happening with that? That's kind of a midlife crisis kind of issue.
Right.
Instagram is interesting because I got more followers there than anywhere else without really like trying overtly. Like all I did was just have something new, post it, and for some reason the algorithm liked me and just went like that. But then it flatlines,
Mm-hmm.
and even though I never gave it much thought, then I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
Like, why am I not getting new followers? But at the same time, like, there's an existing and finite market out there for people who want to see 40-year-old man children drawing Superman. They're out there, but there's a cap.
Yeah.
And, I may have hit that cap. I don't know. But it is like, from just from a salesman standpoint, like, if I post something and I say, hey, I've got new Thundercats prints, I can move some prints. Like, it's
Yeah.
it's a pretty easy way to just immediately get feedback from people
Mm-hmm.
and get paid. So it has been great. I mean, I love it. I'm actually very thankful for it. But I do use it with caution, and I don't. Uh, I try not to depend on it.
It's business. If you have a single client that's 80% of your business, even though you could like say, hey, I make $400,000 a year and I have one, and I only have one client, I would say you're in big trouble.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
like when I worked when I worked at L'Oreal, I developed what I called the hit by the bus theory. And my office is right on Fifth Avenue. I look down and one day I'm like, this whole machine has to keep operating. It doesn't care if I'm here. It doesn't care if anybody in this building is here. If I get hit by the bus, the job continues tomorrow. They just
Hmm.
find a way to get it done. And
Right.
so that's the nature of the whole thing. So if you're one client, which could be the greatest people in the world and you're doing the best work ever, they can change their point of view, their mind. Somebody gets hit by a bus, you're out the door. And
Hmm.
it's so, social media is great, but it shouldn't be your number one,
Yeah.
thing, because it can change
Exactly.
in a flip of the switch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you like, I know that you were pretty exclusive with Marvel for a long time,
Hmm.
and you then had to extricate yourself, physically and emotionally from the situation. Was that part and parcel of your moving out west? Did that help your?
It all kind of coalesced around the same time. So in 2012, that marked 10 years for me at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd kind of made a deal with myself leading up to that if I didn't get like some kind of raise by 10 years, then that was going to be indicative of the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, lo and behold, here we are, 20 years later, that basically have the same rates that I
Right.
started with. And so I make more money than I used to, but that's because I've kind of, well, diversified how things, where I actually gain income from. But going back to 2012, that's where I kind of, like, things could not have been better for me.
Mm.
I was on, I started Daredevil in 2011. It was a hit. I loved the team that we were, working with. Like, it was just great. Just like everything was absolutely perfect. And so I say to myself, let's destroy it. Uh, but that being said, like, I knew I was, from a strategic point of view, I knew I would never be in a better position
Mm-hmm.
to ask for more. And that kind of coincided with having to move out west. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to hit my deadlines. I could have, they would have accommodated me, like, because we were going on and off with other artists as well. Uh, like, I could have taken just a hiatus and come
Mm-hmm.
back. But at the same time, I had lots of other clients knocking at my door asking if I wanted to do stuff. And so I figured, well, everything else in my life is changing right now. I might as well just do this too. And so I needed just a lot of flexibility, and that's what I got. So
Right.
I continued to work for them. I just was no longer exclusive. I was exclusive from about 2005 through 2012. Yeah, pretty good long time.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
long time. Compared to the current sort of model, it's a very long time.
Yeah. And it served me great. I mean, I think I have the career I do because of that time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still kind of reaping the benefits from all that, even though I don't necessarily produce as much as I used to. You know,
Let's opine a second on New York City. Where did you live?
I was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
Okay,
I
sweet.
I go where I go, the rents rise. So,
Sure.
so I I put my finger on a map and I was like, there,
Yeah.
we need to make those rents rise. And then I move there. And then I go to the West Coast. I was like, ooh, that's already pretty high, but I can make it higher.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
go there.
Right. And I'm only assuming you're buying up all the cheap real estate when you do move to these places,
I
Paolo.
I wish I had. I don't usually have the capital on hand, but
No,
you know, I do own a house now, so I now benefit from it finally, which
finally.
took a while,
Yeah, I
but
lived
yeah,
in Hell's
that's kind of
Kitchen.
like that's what happened with me in like 2012, 2013 is we moved out here. I had actually saved a lot because I lived very cheaply in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and I had kind of created a war chest for me to do my own thing. And I was basically going to sit in a room for 2 years and just draw this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved out west. I got married. I bought a house. Then I had a kid. Then I had another kid. So yeah,
The war chest gets smaller and smaller.
yeah, it's just I'd still like to do it. I need to build things up a little bit more before I go out. But my basically my wife supports me. I do okay on my own, but I I'm no longer in a position where I have to like worry about I basically just take a job if I want to really do it. If I think it's really cool and I like the other creators, like so
Mm-hmm.
that it's a very privileged position to be in. But it also just means that I don't make as much work as I used to.
Yeah. Do you find yourself as an, I mean, one of the great benefits of living in New York is the inspiration that you get from living there.
Oh yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I
Do
always
you,
love that architecture.
oh yeah, yeah. I lived in Hell's Kitchen, so I had all the Daredevil
Oh nice.
architecture around me. So,
Oh man.
but how do you I guess sublimate that now because you're not in in an urban environment.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the suburbs.
I didn't want to
I
say it.
just I still I have all my reference folders full of stuff. Google Street View. I actually spend a lot of time on that.
It's
Uh,
great.
Still back in New York.
Yeah, yeah. And you
Uh,
can go back to different years. You're like, hey, what does it
yeah,
look like
yeah.
here in 2011?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually on one of the street. I don't know if it's still up, but back in like 2008 maybe, I was standing outside of Hanley's Comics. Um, I think talking to my dad on probably on a flip phone,
Yeah.
and the Google van drove by. I was like, "Hey, what's up?" So I don't know if that's still there. I'd be curious. I posted on my blog, so it'd be easy to find out, but I may no longer be there. But
Yeah,
long story short, yeah, I loved all that stuff. I love just drawing those big buildings. I don't love it when I'm doing it, but I love having done it.
sure.
And I can't show them, but I did just finish two pieces where I actually did painted New York background. And it had been a while since I did anything like that. It was nice to kind of go back and remember all that.
Yeah. So the painting stuff, I mean, listen, surprise, surprise, you're really good at it. So, like, how do you like
Doesn't feel like
when,
that when it's happening.
no. The struggle is real, folks. It doesn't like
Yeah.
if you don't hate it while you're doing it, then it's not going to be great.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's just the nature of creation. You have to be. There's no painless childbirth, and that's what this is. So, as a middle aged white male,
Yeah.
I'm
I was
going
going to
to
say,
opine about childbirth here. No, but
strong words.
yeah, I know. I'm very, I think it's innocuous enough of a statement.
Yeah.
But like how did you, what was your first cracking into like the painted stuff? Like, were you just like, hey, I'd love to do the cover in painted? Like, was that like a chase down?
No, I was just such a huge Alex Ross fan that I was a little obsessive, back
Okay.
because Kingdom Come came out when I was, I think sophomore year. This was about 16. I actually got, my my parents got me the first two books because I don't think three and four had come out yet.
Okay.
This was like for Christmas, and I always remember that I couldn't figure out which was book one and book two, so I actually read them out of order, but I didn't care. I, no, I wasn't there for the story. Now I do love the story now,
Sure.
and I love Mark Waid, but at the time I was just a little obsessed, and like all I needed was just more Alex Ross artwork in my life, and so that's kind of all I wanted. Like I always loved comics, but man, when I saw that his work, I was just like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I concentrated on. That's what I did for Jim Kruger, and I think it actually made it easier for me to break in at such a young age because there just aren't that many people who can do it, like,
Right.
or people who are dumb enough.
To chase
I
it down.
eventually learned that you don't paint comics, but it took several years for me to figure that
Yeah.
out. Um, whenever the youngins ask me like, what should I do? I want to paint comics. Like, first, draw a comic, and if you still want to paint a comic, then paint a comic. Because it's not a good idea.
Mhm.
There's only like a handful of people who can do it, and I should say Americans who can do it, and I'm not one of them. Uh, you know, it's it's a lot of hours, and
Yeah.
if you're not, the one point I should make is that if you're not really good at drawing, then that's actually more of the issue, and that was kind of my problem, is that I could paint, and it actually stunted my progression for years. I didn't. I don't think I really became like a professional comic book artist until, this is overstatement, but I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing until about 2008, which is when I stopped painting and
Okay.
I started drawing. And because, I started producing pages at a greater rate, I just got better.
Hmm.
I was drawing Spidey, Amazing Spider-Man, and I switched to inking, and those two things, drawing more and inking, made me a better draftsman.
Yeah.
And like, there's just no excuse for not doing it. But the painting, it takes a hold of the worst portions of my personality, which is just go over, like, noodle things, over and over and over, when it would be much better if I just put down one mark.
Right.
So, and I still fight that to this day. Um, it's easier said than done. Like the paintings that I just finished, I if you're not painting from that's the thing. Is like I want it to look as if I painted it from life. You
Hmm.
can't do that because it's not in front of you. So kind of what I do now is you don't literally do this, but you're basically painting something. You're letting yourself noodle it out, figuring it all out. And then once you've extricated that knowledge from the ether, then you can go and paint alla prima and just, set it down like you know what you're doing because it is in front of you and it's more like painting from life. But of course, that adds hours and hours to the process, which you usually don't have. So,
Yeah. I think you have something up on your website of the Walking Dead cover, and you're
yep.
showing all your sort of your comp work to get to that final piece. And like that's like, and I look at that, I'm like, the result's amazing, but you go, the effort of work that it takes to get to that is so, there's so much labor involved in there.
Yeah.
It is not just this like, hey, can you guys just hold still? Let me take this picture, or make a
Right.
sketch from this thing. Like there are so many moving pieces that have to be kind of collected.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the one drawback to where 50% of my income comes from is, aftermarket original art sales. In the back of my mind, whether I try to or not, I'm always thinking about that. Like, I'm going to sell this piece in another 6 months, another year, another 2 years, sometimes 5 years, and I'll get a second payday. So I'm lavishing each piece with more detail, love, whatever, than it
Hmm.
needs.
Yeah.
Uh, but I can't help myself. So, you know, I'm kind of trapped in that. I'm sorry.
Like our brains, it's so crazy how our brains operate. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you made that sort of that simple observation about, Instagram. Well, like when it flatlines, you're like, what am I doing wrong? And then
Yeah.
like, so
Yeah.
like like our brains try to service this kind of intangible aspect. We're
Mhm.
trying to service this. We don't know what the algorithm is doing. So we try to service this, or we don't know what the potential buyer out there for this piece of artwork in the future
Mhm.
may want. Like, so like, well, more is better, right? Right. I'll do
Yeah.
more, Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not, I'm not doing it for them. Like, it's definitely for myself, but it's kind of like a part of myself that I don't like,
Right.
you know? Like, I love original artwork, and I like making something that looks great. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. It's just that I think if I didn't have that market, I would be forced to speed up a little bit.
Gotcha.
Uh, so I don't hate it, but I just feel like I lose something by kind of being comfy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Do you think that it goes back to being a kid? Like because I'm thinking about like how I always lament, like I would, sort of work out the drawing and then it would just like, oh, now I got to ink the damn thing. And that's when I
mm,
knew I was going to go crazy. Like I know I was going to drive myself nuts with detail and all this kind of stuff in there. And like, and I tie it back to like, well, those are the things that made me happy as a kid, like sitting
mm.
down and drawing something, and really, really just kind of getting lost in some sort of sense of detail or whatever the thing is. Do you think that's like an early kind of like emotional connection for you?
I don't know. I've always been like I was just always drawn, so I don't really know. I don't know. Trying to think of like when I kind of developed. I don't think I can really separate my process from my, being obsessed with Alex Ross's art. So I was just
Mm-hmm.
I was just reading any chance, any Wizard magazine article, just like excuse me, how he worked. And
Mm-hmm.
like I still the way I work is still a consequence of that early introduction.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that I use gouache. And when I started out, I tried to separate myself from him by using oils, despite what everyone told me. I
Okay.
should have listened. But that was my own desires. Like I knew I needed to distinguish myself from him
Mm-hmm.
because I had just been so focused on like that kind of style. And I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad it's over because I needed to do the oils to learn like how to paint a different way. So
Mm-hmm.
now I can paint the exact same way as him in terms of the process, but I can have the result look different because I've kind of I'm me, at
Yeah.
least more me than I used to be.
Well, I mean, I wear my, influences on my sleeve all the time. Like I always
Yeah.
did and I still do. I mean, I think even when I write, my influencers are still there and they're not specifically have to be an author's influence. It could be anything. And,
Hmm.
and to me, but that brings a lot of joy to me. Like I really
Yeah.
like feeling that connection to what I find to be a source of inspiration. And I go, oh, well, that makes me feel good. Like I feel like I'm in that whole neighborhood. I'm in the conversation.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. Um, so you have a bit of, I mean, your father, as you said, is inks you, which is
Hmm.
pretty. I'm just saying, it's fucking awesome. Um,
Yeah, it's great.
how does that come about? I mean, was he active when you were growing up?
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, I would say like I was basically created in a lab. Like my parents met, as far as I know, in a drawing class. They had me in 1981, in 1982, they opened up a gallery slash art supply store. And I just sat in the corner with unlimited art supplies and just drew all day, every day. Like that's just what I did. And so, like, could I have done anything else? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but it all worked out for me. Um, yeah, I don't think, well, I just, I always loved superheroes. So that's just what I drew.
Hmm.
Um, but art was, it was always a part of our lives from my very, very first memories. There's always like amazing art on the walls. And, you know, my dad would, like, he didn't like sit me down and, give me lessons every day, but we were always drawing. And
Hmm.
if I had a question, I would ask him. My mom, she also did portraits back in the day, like my dad caricatures. For most of the time growing up, he was doing airbrush t-shirts. That's kind of why I ended up in Daytona Beach. That's my hometown, but that's why they ended up there. Um, then he switched in 1995, 94, 95 to custom motorcycles.
Okay.
And then by the time, I got my own career and was kind of making the transition from painting to inked work, and Marvel wanted to give me Daredevil, I think my mom suggested that my dad try it because, like he's basically the one who taught me how to use a brush.
Right.
So we knew he could do it. And so I gave him like a test piece. He actually, the first thing he did was a Spider-Man Punisher cover. And he actually did it twice
Hmm.
just to like make sure he could do it. And it worked out great. And like I said, the only thing I had to do was fly to Florida to show him how to use the scanner. And
Right.
then once that was done, then he was good to go. And so, Daredevil was his very first, it was his rookie year, and he
Amazing.
hit the ground running, and got best inker that year.
It's
Like,
amazing.
yeah,
It's so amazing.
yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, 2012 was like a crazy year for all that.
Oh yeah. That, I mean, it must be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think on all, like, so many of my greatest memories are, shared projects with my father. Like,
Mhm.
like those things just mean so much to me. And the learning, and how all that stuff has paid off, in dividends as a life, moves on your own. And like, that's like, to me, like the idea of being able to kind of circle back when you're an adult and have that sort of creative connection with your, with a parent,
Yeah.
in a different way. I mean, it's really, your page rate was super high that day.
Yeah, no, it's pretty special. Like I don't, it's, you know, it's great. He was just here, I guess about a month ago. Uh, and I don't, the problem is I don't produce as much artwork as I used to.
Right.
So he's not getting as much inking work from me, but I still, we still do a few covers each year, and then usually I try and send some commissions his way. But
Mm-hmm.
his main job is still like custom motorcycles and that kind of stuff. But
It's unique in so many ways. I mean, there are enough, parent child comic book legacy stories, but
yeah,
this is a little bit different and a little
yeah,
bit in reverse, which is, I
yeah,
think, is
backwards.
really kind of, yeah. I remember I had a whole bunch of students in Atlanta, and I was teaching a drawing class to these advertising and design kids, and I was teaching them how to use it to ink, because I'm like, you need to know how to use like tools to do stuff. So I'd bring in pages, copies, and they would ink them on vellum. Half of the girls in the class would come up to me like, how do I do this? Like, can I make money doing this? Like, they were like, they actually enjoyed the process of inking
Mhm.
to the point where they wanted to kind of like see if that was something they could like to do as a professional, which I thought was like, okay, this is an interesting byproduct of just trying to teach a skill set, to get them through their career.
Yeah. Well, I mean, inking in particular, like my dad likes doing it. He likes it more than, and he like he liked comics, but he was never like a huge fan. So he doesn't like
Hmm.
read them regularly, but he likes the process of inking. He turns on an audiobook and 5 hours it's going like this, and it's pretty relaxing. I think it's more relaxing than his custom motorcycle job. And I actually miss it a little bit because it's such a different job.
Yeah.
Penciling can be, well, it is. It's much more frustrating because it's more brain power. When I'm
Hmm.
inking, I turn on an interview, a podcast, whatever I want to listen to, a lot of audiobooks, and time melts away and I learn something. So
Hmm.
it's such a different experience than what penciling is. And coloring is probably the same for me because it just uses a different part of your brain. It doesn't use as much of my brain. Um, it's both good and bad, but yeah, I do miss it sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I totally catch you on that one. Like I have all these there's these buckets of the type of work, for the work on projects. I'm like, well, this one I'll be able to listen to a podcast. This one
Yeah.
I have to have absolute silence. This one, like, I can listen to music, but with no words. Like I have like
Hmm.
all of these kinds of like rules of what can happen when I'm doing work. And I mean, I remember like my foolish hubris in my early 20s of like, I can watch a tennis match and still draw a comic book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess what? You can't.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely there's different categories of things, like even audible stuff, uh, where you can only process so much information at a time depending on what you're doing. And so there are some interviews you can listen to, and there's some that you can't.
Yeah.
And part of what I had to learn, kind of in the early 2000s, like I have to, like you were saying, set certain things aside for different times. And even in
Hmm.
the course of a day, like I was working pretty hard. My wife took the kids for 4 days, so I had like, which I haven't had in a very long time, but I had 4 days, maybe like three and a half, to do nothing but work, and I did. I like painted like the wind. But if you're doing like 16 hours a day, even if it's the same kind of work, you have to. I'll put it this way: from 11 at night to midnight, I need to put on an episode of Rick and Morty just to
Hmm.
like keep me awake. And
Right.
so I, I'm not watching it, but I will occasionally like look over just because I need to be re-energized just because it's the end
Hmm.
of the day. And that's very different from me in the morning where I can like just listen to some, usually a podcast and news or something where I don't have to remember everything that I'm hearing.
Right.
Um, but anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I listen to a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I was having this very same conversation with my wife over the weekend. We were just discussing about different things and like, well, yeah, I mean, the podcast of a conversation, I don't need to be completely focused. Like I know, like I can listen in on the conversation. It's like I'm
Yeah,
eavesdropping almost. Um, but boy, like a book, I got to pay attention. Like if I
yeah,
don't pay attention, I'm like, wait, what just happened? Like I don't know
yeah.
what's going on, and I get flustered. Yeah, it's easy for my brain to fall off track. It's just the nature of it. So I'd love to learn a little bit about your painting process and like how your incarnation from concept to execution, because you have a bunch of different steps in your thing. So I'm guessing there's a very much a hand to digital to back to hand. Hand. When I say hand, I mean analog.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth all the time. So most projects for me start out digitally. I just have a template in Photoshop that I always open up no matter what. It's a very because it has a perspective template in it. It's actually a very big file. It's like 400 megabytes, and then I just delete what I don't need.
Okay.
One thing I will say, like I've mentioned it before, but if you work digitally, especially in Photoshop, but really anything, uh, I try and in that template, I have one layer that reduces brightness and uh, puts a yellow screen over everything, basically cutting out blue light.
Hmm.
And that has saved my eyes. And so every once in a while, I'll open up something that is, the full bright white of the paper, and it actually like I get a physical response in my eyes. I'm like, ooh, that is painful. So if you are staring at a screen all day, I highly recommend it, especially if you're drawing just, drawings on white paper. Just put in a layer on top that decreases the brightness and yellows the paper because it. And I also have a layer that adds texture to it because I find if I can see a texture instead of just blank computer white, I just my brain believes it more. It believes in
Hmm.
the paper and believes in the process more than if it doesn't. So anyway, that's where most things start. Once I know what I'm doing and I have time, then I do traditional. Because if I don't have time, I just keep it all in Photoshop the whole
Okay.
way. And I use, Carl T. Webster's brushes and my own modifications. I think I have one brush by Greg Rutkowski. He's one of the plaintiffs, by the way, in the class action lawsuit against
Okay.
OpenAI. But, I can finish things digitally if I want to. And in fact, right now I'm about to, I'm doing something for the Hero Initiative. I'm going to paint
Cool.
paint a Superman on it. I'm going to paint traditionally something that I had only ever done digitally. It was for Sideshow, but I figure, hey, I never got to paint this, so I might as well do it, for this since it's going for charity anyway. But if I'm not going, keeping it digitally the entire process, I I usually do a finished pencil. I don't think I have any examples that I can show right now, but a pretty highly detailed set of pencils that I then print out onto, uh, I think it's Strathmore mixed media board, which is basically like an illustration board. I have an
Hmm.
Epson P400 printer, which will accept up to 52, I think it's 52 point poster board. I can't
Okay.
remember. Basically, it's under 2 millimeters, but it's pretty thick. And the
Hmm.
reason I use that stuff is because then I don't have to tape it down to anything, and it will accept, water-based paint without bending too much. And so I use that for most anything that I'm going to put color on. Um, Once that comes out, I print out the pencils and then I do the first layer just like Alex Ross, where it's grisaille gray tone. He uses straight black, not always, but I think he uses most pieces ivory black. I tend to do sepia, which is just dark brown,
Hmm.
and then for the darkest parts, I'll add a little bit of ivory black. Once that's finished, then I'll go and kind of do a glaze over it in watercolor. And once that's done, it looks pretty finished by that point, but then I usually like to add some opaque passes. And that's
Hmm.
when I'll get out my, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a whole palette
Okay.
where it's a piece of plexiglass that's wrapped in a cloth and then wrapped in parchment paper. And so it's kind of like a stay wet palette.
Hmm.
And it works great because you can like mix things as if it were oil paint, get everything exactly the way you want it, and it'll keep it wet for, until it dries out. You just keep adding
Nice.
water. It's like my little garden. So then once it's done, then I scan it in. And most paintings take about an hour of Photoshop work just to get it to look the way the actual piece looks. Just because
Right.
the color corrections always such an issue. Sometimes I'll actually go in and you know repaint some things that I wasn't quite happy with. This piece I finished last night. I there was a logo on a mug. Towards the end of the painting, I realized I made the mug too small. So
Mm.
I physically painted the mug bigger. Wasn't a big problem, but the logo on the mug was going to take a lot more time, and so I just scanned it, popped it up
Yeah.
bigger in Photoshop, and it was done. So yeah, it's like digital, traditional, back to digital, all over the place.
That's cool. You said you were talking about the texture on the digital file having a texture to work on. Do you put a texture on your tablet surface to draw against?
So yeah, so the Cintiq has the etched glass,
Hmm.
which is decent. When I was working on an iPad, I did buy a screen protector that gave it some tooth. For the Cintiq, I have to use the felt nibs. Anything
Okay.
else just feels like you're just like scraping plastic on plastic, and I hate it.
Right.
Um, One of the other things that, so I've been fairly happy with Wacom over the years. I had a tablet back in 1999. The Cintiq that I bought, the Cintiq Pro 16, back, I don't know how many years now when I got it, maybe 2015, 2016. So it's lasted, but the software sucks, and it was making my modifier keys stick, not physically, but it just does something to the computer. And I had it do the same thing to two different computers, where I use my modifier key like Option for eyedropper, that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
and then you let go of it, but it's still holding it.
It would stay. Right.
Yeah, and it's totally Wacom's fault, like totally, like it's
Ugh.
definitely them. The reason I got upset with them is because I would say like it's doing this, and they're like, try this, try that, reinstall, and then finally I got through to somebody. It was like, yeah,
Yeah, we know. Yeah.
we know this is an issue, and I'm just like, oh, you bastards. So they know it's a problem. I'm not willing to update the driver because it usually causes other problems. So
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
using a
Right.
really old driver. All that being said, the thing that saved my life was this 4 box. Um, I bought this on a
So it's an
recommendation.
external controller. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's got uh, lots and lots of buttons, but the main thing, it has 3 dials. So one,
Hmm.
2, 3, mapped out with everything I use. So my left hand, draw with my right. My left hand rarely touches the keyboard now.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
everything is done through this, with a few exceptions. Um, and that solved my problem. So the Cintiq still has the same issues, but because I use that secondary peripheral,
You're running through that whole thing, which is a different language. It's taking care of your problem.
saved my, mental health. I can't even.
But you're still not
It,
going to update your software. No driver updates.
every once in a while, if I'm forced to, I
Yeah.
will. So same
Yeah.
with Photoshop. Like, never update Photoshop the week before a deadline. Like you just don't.
Oh,
Y-
yeah. No.
Yeah,
I sit there with the red circles on my computer, like saying, "Hey, you've got an update," and I'm like, "Yeah, I also need to eat. Like, I am not going to touch any of that stuff because I don't
yeah,
want to
yeah.
have to eat."
Yeah. I always wait until like the last moment, and then you never update more than one thing at a time. So, I'll update the OS on my Mac. I'll update um, what Photoshop. I think I'm a few behind on Photoshop. Um, yeah, there's usually some features on Photoshop. Recently I was pleasantly surprised because I did something that I asked them to do for a long time. Because I have a few contacts at Adobe, and well, the first thing they did that was great is they allow you to flip the canvas,
Mm-hmm.
without having to actually change the file, which would take
Right. Right.
forever, which I would do, but this one's instant. Uh, but the last update that they did, they also flip your brushes, and I was just like so happy.
Wow.
Did
Yeah.
it because everything that all the brushes that I use, with only a couple exceptions, they are all rotationally dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I'm painting and I'm using a flat brush, like if my brush is this way, I don't want it to paint like this.
Right. Right. Totally. No straight
And
line.
and
Yeah.
so they finally fixed that. And like I think I thanked them on Twitter because it just made my life. It's one more thing that I was waiting for years, and they finally did.
Yeah. No. I mean, listen, nothing's ever going to be perfect, but
Yeah, yeah.
they have such a huge ask. I worked in a large enough corporation that they would come to us and talk to us about what they were doing, so we could kind of give our feedback in advance. But you know, there's just no there's no satisfying anybody or everybody, I should say, in that respect. Like it's just such a big beast. It's a huge piece of software, and
But yeah, that's in particular, that's the problem with Adobe, is that we're not we're not their clientele. Like artists, we
no,
use their stuff, but
yeah,
we're not. who they're aiming for. And so we'll never be like, and I worked with them. They, I was working with Kyle T. Webster, who,
Hmm.
Adobe hired to try and develop. Well, they hired him for a bunch of different reasons, but one of the things he was working on was Fresco, which is an iPad sketching app.
Hmm.
I helped test that, and I'll be the first to say, like, I did not like it at all.
Yeah.
And part of it is just because, like, it's great for sketching, but if
Hmm.
you're doing like big time work, big time files, like it's a layer that only slows you down.
Yeah.
And so, I've mixed feelings about that. I enjoyed working with them and giving them my suggestions and whatnot, but I didn't, not a huge fan of the final product, because it's just not made for me, basically.
No, no, I use it for literally just for sketching.
Yeah,
If I have an environment that I need to communicate something to a client or to a vendor, I will do a drawing in this
yeah,
space and I go, this is what we need. This is what we're talking about. And everyone goes, oh, okay.
yeah,
But after that, it goes over to Photoshop. It's just,
exactly.
and listen, you're right. It's not called Comic Shop. It's called
Right.
Photoshop.
Yeah. And I tried to learn Clip Studio for like a hot minute back
Mm-hmm.
in 2017 when I did 3 issues of Hellboy. And I should have known, but I tried to, bite off more than I could chew. Where what I should have done is just done one cover in it, because it's
Mm-hmm.
actually it's very similar. Like, when
Yeah.
that's kind of why I thought that I could do it, is because I opened it up and I was like, I changed a few of the buttons, hotkeys and whatnot. I was like, I'm basically already trained on it. And then what I did was I tried to make a book
Yeah.
using, like, because it has a lot of powerful tools. Like, you can map out the entire book, you can give all these dimensions, and I got so frustrated because it wasn't doing exactly what it said it was, and it wasn't getting the dimensions right, and I was like, I don't have time for this, so I moved on. So
Mm-hmm.
in the back of my mind, I'd still like to try it, especially for the perspective tools. But because I'm old and I use Photoshop and I already have all that stuff there, I'm, I'll keep using it until it breaks or I break.
Until you can. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you had the absolute right idea. It was just the wrong, implementation of that idea because of the timeline. Like if you had like something with a longer timeline, great, you get paid to learn a new thing. But
exactly.
in comics case,
Yeah.
it doesn't work that
Well,
way.
and I'm usually good about that kind of stuff, but I just got fooled into it because my initial trial worked so well. And I was like,
Right. Like,
these are,
yeah,
I did. I was kind of shocked. I was like, this is working so well. I can just dive right in. And then I dove right in and I couldn't swim. So that was that.
you were the second knight in was it the Holy Grail when they
Yeah.
go like what and you're like, well, that's easy, and you went running up to give the answer and you're like, well, I don't know, and off you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, I
Hubris.
oh, dude, it gets me every time.
Yeah.
Or I should say, I get myself every time. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's it's. I think it's a great tool. I think it's great up to the coloring side. I don't like the coloring as much on on a Clip Studio
Mhm.
as much as a Photoshop. I think Photoshop is just more robust.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people. Like, they'll, even when they start something in Clip Studio, the all the post-production stuff ends up in
It's
Photoshop.
like export as PSD. Off we go.
Yes, and that's another thing that kind of kept me from it, because I wasn't coloring that, but in the back of my mind I was like, eventually I will, and
Mm-hmm.
if I have to switch back and forth, I'm not gonna like it.
Yeah, just I mean, it's anything that slows it down. I mean, it's like website design. Like
Yeah,
if you reach a certain amount of clicks, you're just going to lose your user
yeah,
every time. Yeah,
yeah,
and so
yeah. That's actually
I
kind of what my wife does for Google. Like, she's working on Chrome OS, and so it's like
okay.
that. That's all they do.
Yeah, yeah. It really so, but your kitchen must be really efficient. Like everything is within
Oh
like
my God, no, that's
two movements.
it's a total every dish washer fill is a total fight. Like, she she likes them one way, I like them the other, like,
Uh
and
huh.
both of us are like, that's not efficient. So
Right.
yeah,
Dude,
Same old shit.
that's our house too. It's the same
Yeah, I
thing.
think
Like,
that's everybody.
yeah. I know, but I think when you have people who have creative endeavors, like we're absolutely convinced that like our sense of spatial awareness is better than anybody else's.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm surprised we don't fight about it more. But usually it's because like one of us just takes one for the team and just like, this doesn't matter.
Right,
But I
right,
would like I'd be so curious to like sit and listen to some of her meetings because you know I've never been involved with anything like that. So I just
right.
unbounded curiosity about how all that stuff gets made. And, like you're saying, like at a scalable factor
Yes.
where you you physically can't be there holding someone's mouse. You have to
Hmm.
tell them like, I need this done, but there's also some things that you're gonna have to solve on your own.
Right.
Um,
Well, and
so
they
I
A/B test. Like
right, right,
it's
right,
very
right.
hard. It's for you to A/B test is like I'm going to do one cover in Clip Studio and one cover in Photoshop. And who knows if it's even a fair test because two completely different subjects and two different completely different palos. Like you may wake up cranky one day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to the tour box thing, like, so one of the wheels I have set to is just undo redo. And
Hmm.
so a lot of what I'm doing, especially towards, post production, coloring, that kind of stuff, not so much drawing, but I'm always just, try something, did it suck? Try it, did it suck? And so I'm
Right.
always going back and forth with that wheel. And it's better than, hitting command Z. You can actually like step back a few steps, and it's great.
Wow,
And
that's
I
cool.
I love that because you can't. It's the only way that I can judge things. That I just have to see it. You know.
I love that. It's like a little time machine for drawing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I mean it's I mean like you said earlier, I mean you're fortunate to be in your, at this time in your life
Mhm.
doing the thing that you're doing because you have access to all these great tools which weren't around when you first started. They just didn't exist.
Yeah, I turned something in. Like today was the deadline, and I don't have to worry about FedEx. I just upload it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's good to go. I was kind of lamenting that the other day because I loved going into the Marvel office, and like that's where I saw my very first piece of Alex Ross original artwork. It's like
Hmm.
the editor brought me into his office and showed me a Captain Marvel painting that he had done. He pulled it out of these big flat files. I don't even know if they have
Yeah,
flat files anymore. Probably not. And I just, I imagine that as an editor, that's got to be one of the big perks, or it used to be one
yeah,
of the big perks of the job. And I don't know if they see any physical artwork anymore. I can't imagine that they do. Obviously Alex Ross is still doing lots of covers for them. I don't think he's sending it in. I don't know. I'd be curious to find
yeah.
out. But as far as I know, I think he has someone, scan it for him, and then they'll
i
send
would
the digital file. But I don't
I
know.
would assume he would for production control, like
Well, he's famously like not great at computers, but obviously it hasn't slowed him down at all. So more
no,
power to him.
no. I
Stay
when I first got
traditional.
in when I first started working with Marvel in '91. So my first writer was Dan Slott, and
Oh,
Dan
nice, awesome.
was the returns. I'm going to
Yeah,
call him editor. I don't know if that was the title, but he was in charge of returns.
yep,
So we would hang out in his, and I say office. It was just a large closet,
yep.
and we would hang out. We would talk comics and stories and stuff. But they had this big bin, this big gray bin, that probably used for rubbish or for big mail deliveries or whatever. But in it was just a big old heap of artwork. And they didn't know who did the artwork. On the walls
Oh
were
boy.
these little sleeves with envelopes full of all the artwork for returns coming from the camera room. So I would sit there and I would go through the bin and go, oh, this is so and so.
Oh, right, right, right.
Because Dan's a phenomenal writer, but he doesn't know the artist. Like he doesn't have the ability to look at it and go, well, that's Ron Friends who did that, or that's
Right, right, right.
whomever. And
Yeah,
yeah,
growing up, like there came a point where I realized, like, oh, not everyone no,
No, no.
because I just for me it's just it's so obvious,
Right.
and that's not that's an ability I've always had. So it's not something like I mean obviously you train on it like
Hmm.
you have to be looking at the artwork, but I know now that there are people who can do that and then not be able to glean identity from it. And
Right.
so I had to learn that that's actually a gift that kind of I had nothing to do with.
No,
That's
totally.
so
I
funny.
my first year at SVA, I was walking, I was hanging out with these upperclassmen, they were a year older than me, but they were sitting there and they were flipping through the Marvel Universe, books with all the characters and all their powers.
Yeah,
And they would hold it up and someone go, and they would name the artist, the
yeah,
person on the side of the hallway.
yeah,
And
like a
like,
normal
at
person.
right. But at my point, my acumen was, John Byrne, Frank Miller, like it was very basic, like
Yeah,
I didn't have the fine tune, oh, well, so-and-so inked that over it. And then like, but that prompted me to say like, I better pay closer attention. Like I need to
right.
know who these people, who everybody is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It actually that's actually one of my favorite things is when it gets tricky when it's an inker who doesn't typically ink another that
Mm-hmm.
particular artist. And I saw one recently where it was like Joe Sinnott, but he did somebody besides Kirby. And it's just like it was so funny because it's in there, it's in my brain, and they see
Mm-hmm.
both things, but it's the cognitive dissonance like that this doesn't match for a reason, and so you have to take a second look and be like, oh, that's who that is, and that's why it doesn't seem normal in my brain.
Yeah, and some of those inkers can like almost change what the art, the penciling looks like you
Oh,
almost
for
in
sure.
fundamental. Yeah, like it's like this copy, it's like this overwrite of DNA. Like they're changing it. Like Sienkiewicz is a master at inking other people, and you
Yeah.
don't really like. It's even hard to say that's him. You're like, wait, wait,
Well,
who did
I
this?
love doing that. Like I'll ink on
Yeah.
Joe Quinones sometimes, and I love it because it's our styles are close enough that it works, but I get this sense of ownership over something that I didn't have to put the hard work into. uh, but yeah,
I love it.
it is inking is just that funny thing. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, speaking of SVA inking, um, David Mazzucchelli, as far as I remember, he got a job at Marvel, but then lost it because somebody inked over him and it looked terrible.
Oh
I
no.
don't, I don't know who it was, but apparently it was so bad that he had to basically reapply under a pseudonym, inking himself. And that's after that point, he always inked himself. And thank goodness.
Wow. Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's just what that's how powerful the job of inking is
yeah.
because you kind of have the final say over all that.
Oh, for
And,
sure.
and you can make it better or you can obliterate
Yeah. Wow. Damn. Well,
it.
I guess we got something good out of that one with David
Yeah,
because
yeah. We all won.
we all win in that one. Yeah. So can you talk about anything that you can talk about rather than all the things you can't talk about that people
I
might
know.
be able to like, yeah,
Yeah,
all the super secret stuff that you're working on.
it's been kind of a weird year. I've had a lot of new clients this year, more than I usually do. Because usually I have one client, and that's Disney. But the one thing I can say is I'm doing 6 issues, 6 covers for Action Comics. The
Right.
first three were Bizarro, and then the second three will be Brainiac. I think I could say that. Working for a video game company right now. I can't say anything about that. Um, I want to do a movie poster next year. I can't say anything about that. Um, I want to do. Oh, no, I can't. God, it's like all these freaking NDAs, and I gotta keep it
Yeah.
all
Yeah. I
straight in my
know.
mind. Um, what can I say? Oh, I will be doing the original Art Expo in Orlando at the end of January. So it'll be my
Oh, cool.
first convention since the pandemic started. Actually, since before the pandemic. 'Cause when my second kid was born in 2019, like that was it. Like I didn't leave the house after that.
Wow. Okay.
But I'm gonna bring him. and then also visit my parents in Florida
Oh,
because
right on.
we used to go to Florida every Christmas, and then once he was born, that didn't happen anymore. So he's never been to Florida, and I want to bring him along. Um, gonna do some stuff for. I think hopefully I get to do a couple of GI Joe pieces.
Oh, sweet.
I don't know if I can say it, but I'm gonna go ahead and it's not
Yeah.
top secret. Those are super fun because you basically get to make the toy box art,
Mhm.
and they even use the original explosion painting by
Oh,
is it
yeah, yeah.
Hector Garita or Harita? I don't know how to pronounce the name. But he did all that box art back in the 80s that I just loved. So I'll do a couple of those and more Action Comics covers than that. Else, something else fun that I'm not remembering. Oh, I really I I usually try and do one piece of sequential art or story per year. I didn't do any this past year, maybe even not the year before that. So next year I'm going to set aside time and do hopefully an issue of something.
Okay.
I think it's going to be for DC. I don't know yet. They asked me to do something. I couldn't hit the deadline, but I told them I want to do that same writer, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that gets done this year, which means you probably won't see it until 2025, but
Right, right,
that's the goal.
right on. Well, they can chase you down on Instagram or wherever you may be on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
internet.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
That also reminds me. Speaking of long gestating pieces of artwork, I think in 2024 the Spider-Man freshman year uh, cartoon will come out on Disney Plus. So
Oh,
I
cool.
worked on that for like kind of like the last 2 years, and that was about I- at first I was about halftime, and then I was even less. But I did do a lot of work for it, and I haven't been able to show any of it. So hopefully that comes out this year, and it was a ton of fun to work on. It was
I'll bet. I'll bet. All right, Paolo, I'm going to let you go so you can figure out what the next step is. But
awesome.
thanks so much for joining me, man. This is a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, my pleasure. I loved it. I've listened to a couple of them, specifically Dustin Weaver and Becky Cloonan, and it's so nice to be able to work while also listening to other comic book artists who are also struggling. I don't mean like struggling with their careers, like they're super
No, no, no.
successful, but it's just nice
Sure.
to know that doesn't end and it's normal, and it's
Yeah.
just always nice to hear.
Yeah. I don't think it ever stops for anyone.
No,
But thanks, man. And I hope to see you maybe at a convention in the near future.
yeah, I hope to start doing more of them now.